During the beginning of the war, the North had little over twice as many horses as the South did. Around this time, horses ran around $150 each. When adjusted for inflation, it comes to around $4,000 today. These livestock were an investment for these men, and losing them meant losing money, power, and social class. Even though the horses were clearly important to both the North and the South as they fought, the two regions had very different views as to what a horse would mean to them before, during, and after the war. In the South, before the war, horses were seen as a sign of elite power, and many people that lived throughout the region were better horsemen. Because the South was more rural and towns were more spread out, people relied on horses more for individual transport. The South cavalry was better equipped to have a cavalry simply because the men that fought were better horsemen. In fact, before a man would be allowed to join the cavalry, they would have to undergo an examination that would determine how good of horsemen they were. In addition, it was also seen that many of the horses used in the Southern cavalry often came from more elite bloodlines, when compared to the horses found in the South. The cavalry in the South was seen as a rich man's undertaking, was not taken lightly. Conversely, the North would use cheaply bred Morgan horses. The breed is capable of traveling very large distances at a very fast pace without tiring very easily, and seemed like a very obvious choice for the North. These horses were sturdier than the horses seen in the South, but they were worth not near as much. Many men that joined the cavalry in the North were not experienced in handling and riding horses. The North faced a serious disadvantage simply because their men and horses were not as prepared to raise a cavalry.
Throughout the Civil War, there was a shortage of horses. During this shortage, the cavalry still had to train horses to be ready to go into the battle. Many of these horses had to attend a type of boot camp where the riders aggressively rode their horses in loud and battle-like situations in order to bomb-proof the horse and make sure they were comfortable in this hostile environment. In the end of training, the horses were given one final task. The horses were led by army men and instructed to lie down as a cannon opened fire down the end of the field. If the horses panicked and stood up, they would be shot and released from duty.
Throughout the Civil War, many generals would ride due to their position of power and authority. Not to mention, the generals also could be heard better at this height and could also command better. The height difference between them and the soldiers was great enough for them to see out across the battlefields and manage their troops. However, due to them being taller, it also made them a more obvious target and made it easier for enemies to hit. While horses clearly provided many advancements in aid to the military, they also provided many problems throughout the war. Just like the soldiers that fought, horses were also faced with disease, malnutrition, and injury that resulted from the war. Many horses would be released from duty on the side of a road if they were no longer capable of fulfilling the job required of them. It also took a long time to properly train and raise a cavalry that would be well equipped to fight in the war. After almost 2 years of training and work, a cavalry would be able to be efficient in the war. Of course, just like anything else, it also took a lot of money to achieve this. The raising of a cavalry was critical for both sides, and both the Union and the Confederacy took into account the positive worth of the cavalry in the war. In addition, horses also required a lot of feed. If there were 3 artillery guns that needed to be moved, then it would require a total of 18 horses to pull the guns. In order to be able to move all of the feed, that the horses alone would require another wagon pulled by another 6 horses would be needed.
During the year 1859, the United States Department of War started using the McClellan saddle during war. This was due to the fact that it was incredibly lightweight, cheap, and sturdy enough to carry the rider and all of his gear off to war. The gear that these men carried to war would mostly include a food holder for the horses, a comb to groom the horses, a lariat or a rope, and a pen to keep the horses in place while they were grazing, and of course, the man's musket to fight. It was crucial to carry as little weight as possible to prevent and not tire the horses out. Many men carried only the necessities. It was through these powerful animals that men were able to do much more and be much more efficient within the war on both the Confederate and Union sides. These horses offered speedy transportation of themselves and their supplies. Many men put in time, money, and effort into these animals, and the outcome in the war was greatly appreciated.